Thank you all again for joining us today. My name is Sarah Reeves and I'm the marketing manager with New Society Publishers. We would like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from the unceded traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations and that we are welcoming attendees from a wide range of territories. This past year has been a challenge on a variety of levels, but it has also brought lessons of community building, resilience, self-sufficiency, food security, and equity and diversity to the forefront. New Society Publishers remains committed to bringing you books that offer positive solutions for troubled times. We're proud to hold the highest environmental and social standards of any publishers in North America. You can find out more about our sustainability practices in the link in the chat. That will appear shortly. We have one more event left this spring, which is on May 27th at the same time, 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, with the author and photographer of Growing Conifers. This beautiful book right here. It's the complete illustrated gardening and landscaping guide, and we'll put the link in the chat to register for this final event of the season. And if you'd like to stay up to date with upcoming events, sales, and new books, please sign up for our newsletter, and that link will also be in the chat. So we would like this virtual experience to be as interactive as possible, so please let us know where you're joining us from and post comments and questions in the chat. At the end of the talk today, Blake will answer some of the questions posted based on how much time we have left. And we'll also give away a copy of his beautiful book, Pawpaws, a complete growing and marketing guide, by choosing one of the posted questions in the chat comment section. So be sure to participate for your chance to win. And this is for anybody on Facebook or in our Zoom webinar can be entered to win if you post a question. And as well, one of our Zoom attendees will be randomly selected to win a subscription to Harrowsmith, which is Canada's Green Lifestyle magazine. And so be sure to, so that will be a random selection. And Harrowsmith is Canada's premier magazine on everything rural, organic, and green. And finally, we invite you to enjoy a 25% discount on Blake's book using the code PAWPAW25, and we'll put the link up to his book page on our website. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Blake. Blake is an organic farmer, nurseryman, musician, poet, writer, educator, scientist, and mystic with over 20 years experience in organic agriculture, botany, horticulture, and growing food. Blake owns and operates Heritage Nursery, a Peaceful Heritage Nursery, a 4-acre USDA Certified Organic research farm, orchard, and edible plant nursery with a special interest in pawpaws. He shares his 2 decades of experience in organic agriculture and horticulture through magazine articles, public speaking engagements, and blogging. He is a speaker and educator for OAK, which is the Organic Association of Kentucky, an educational blogger at peacefulheritage.com, and a YouTuber. He splits his time between farming, research, gardening, travel, meditation, and being a husband and father. So we welcome you to the show, Blake, and thanks again for everybody's patience. And I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And we're ready to get started here, so let's just go ahead and jump on in. Okay. Can everybody see this okay? Sarah, can somebody send me a line, make sure that you all can see this okay?
Yeah, it's all showing up well.
All right. Okay, so we're going to jump right in here. All right, so this is an introduction to Pawpaws, and I'm Blake Cothron, the author of the book Pawpaws, the Complete Growing and Marketing Guide. and this can be found at peacefulheritage.com as well as other online stores. And Peaceful Heritage is our certified organic nursery based in Stanford, Kentucky. And we have a full range of products that we sell, with Pawpaws being one of our specialties. And we will have pawpaw trees available this June as well as next January. And we ship those all over the country. So you can check us out at peacefulheritage.com. Okay, so what is a pawpaw? For any of you that don't know, pawpaws, the Latin name is Asimina triloba, also sometimes called North American pawpaws, are North America's largest edible fruit. Other wild edible Native American fruits include American persimmons, pecans, several species of blueberries, and wild plums of various species. But pawpaw is the biggest one as far as weight and size goes. Papaya, Carica papaya, is a tropical fruit of the tropical Americas, and it's also sometimes called pawpaw, causing much confusion. They're not related or similar. Sometimes if you do a Google search for pawpaw or pawpaw fruit, you'll get pictures of papaya, and some nurseries and things also have pictures of papaya instead of pawpaws when they're going for Asimina triloba. Okay, so pawpaw is actually a member of the tropical fruit family Annanaceae. There's a soursop on the left and cherimoya on the right, and these are tropical cousins to pawpaw. And you can see some similarity between them and pawpaw as well. So pawpaws share many characteristics with other tropical Annanaceae fruits. The seeds and flowers are very similar, foliage is similar, flavors are even similar. However, pawpaws are temperate plants and not tropical plants, and will not grow in the tropics. They have to have a dormant cold period where they're leafless. They are extremely cold hardy, down to -20 or -30 Fahrenheit, -20 Celsius to -34 Celsius, and sometimes even colder. This is the approximate native range for Asimina triloba. This, you can see it goes down here to the upper South, including Kentucky, Tennessee, and the top portions of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the mountainous areas of North Carolina, all the way up here to some parts of upstate New York, Pennsylvania. And in Canada, it hits just the fringes of Ontario, somewhere around here, around the lakes, and going down some of the fringes of Ohio, Wisconsin, Missouri as well. This is actually one of my old pawpaw stomping grounds. This is an old wild grove of pawpaws in their native habitat. This is Beargrass Creek in Louisville, Kentucky, inside Cherokee Park. So you can see the trees grow very closely together because they're actually mostly clonal suckers. So this is actually just probably a few different specimens, but they sucker out and make a big patch like this that appears to be many different trees, but it's actually just one or two or three. Outside of that range, particularly in the southern USA, there are other related species, such as Asimina parviflora and Asimina pygmea. That's a dwarf variety. These produce much smaller, inferior fruit for eating, but have nice blooms and may be useful for breeding hybrids, possibly even a dwarf pawpaw someday, which does not currently exist as far as a dwarf Asimina triloba. And we're going to go into a little back history. So Native Americans within pawpaw's native range, Cherokee, Iroquois, etc., made wide use of the fruit. Children used the large, shiny black seeds as game pieces. The extremely strong, stringy bark made very durable ropes. It's almost unbreakable. The fruit was eaten fresh, and the crushed seeds are effective at killing head lice because the tree is rich in insecticidal compounds. These are known as acetogens. Some have said that the presence of large concentrated groves of pawpaw in the middle of forested areas have been used by archaeologists as markers of past settlements. Hitchhiking pawpaws. Some have speculated that pawpaws are possibly originally a tropical species, but moved northward via northern migrating South American Native American tribes that also carried and planted the seeds where they settled, gradually acclimatizing it to further and further northern regions. But so far, there's little to no evidence that for this theory. The reality is that there are many, many temperate plant species that have larger families in the tropics. The North American native passion fruit is a perfect example, Passiflora incarnata. That's a photo from our nursery of the native, very cold, hardy passion fruit. However, pawpaw's curious resemblance in both form and flavor to tropical fruits is fascinating and a big draw for temperate land people. They have beautiful flowers, and this is actually, they're in bloom like this right now. It's actually late. Usually they bloom around mid-April. Right now they're blooming early and mid-May, but the flowers are very tropical looking and reminiscent of other Annona species. And the flowers are actually water shedding and therefore adapted for effective pollination even during spring rains. You can see these flowers kind of, they point downwards, so any spring rains will not wash away pollen or interfere with insects getting inside of there. And pawpaws are pollinated by flies and beetles, including ladybugs and also spiders and ants and many species of flies. They're not pollinated by honeybees or other species of bees whatsoever. And on that note, there is a common, very silly myth out there that the flowers smell like rotting meat or some sort of putrid flesh. They absolutely do not have any putrid or off smell whatsoever. They smell very slightly yeasty. If you stick your nose right up in the flower, they will not stink up your property. They don't stink at all. They don't even really have hardly any smell. They have a slight yeasty odor that attracts things that are attracted to yeast and fermenting fruit, such as flies and fruit flies. So back to a little history. The early American European settlers eventually learned of pawpaws and added them to their diets. The Lewis and Clark expedition was famously saved from starvation by feasting on wild pawpaw fruit during a difficult episode. As time went on, folklore, medicinal uses, and a small seasonal market for pawpaws developed. By the early 1900s, pawpaws were found in many fruit markets during late summer and early autumn within their range. Neil Peterson explains, I was shocked to find an article from 1916 in the Journal of Heredity. A nationwide USA contest had been held looking for the best pawpaws. This is 1916. They drew in entries from Kansas to Maryland. Pawpaws grow in the South, but almost all the entries were from the Midwest. The scientists reported that the material shipped in was much better than they'd expected. They were very positive that pawpaws had a future as an orchard crop. Okay, that was over 100 years ago. But oddly, after the contest, nothing much happened with pawpaws for the next 60 to 70 years. Mostly they were a cherished fruit of rural Americans, foragers, hunters, woods exploring children, and back to the landers. They fell off the radar and attention of horticulture, farmers, and commerce. But in the mid to late 20th century, a few interested men were quietly breeding and hybridizing them and trying to explore and enhance their possibilities. This included Dr. George Zimmerman and David Fairchild. And there's also R. Neil Peterson, who became fascinated with pawpaws in the late 1970s and eventually pioneered the modern pawpaw revival. Much of the focus of his work has been to create and identify pawpaws that, one, taste good, produce good yields, are consistent and reliable, have high pulp to seed ratio, and that means less seed and more fruit pulp, have good disease resistance, and are able to be reproduced vegetatively via grafting. Another large part of his pawpaw improvement work was finding space, interest, and cooperation in developing pawpaws. This kind of work necessitates large plantings, breeding programs, funding, etc. Neil Peterson actually said that he wanted to put out about 10,000 or something pawpaws, but wasn't able to find the cooperation for that. So he had to go for smaller plantings of hundreds, maybe up to 1,000. And there have been several efforts in this regard that Neil Peterson spearheaded and or assisted. Neil also discovered through very tedious research and exploration offspring of the winners of the 1916 pawpaw contest. This began his breeding work with pawpaws that has gone on for over 25 years. By 2021, 7 superior cultivars have been selected, trademarked, and released by Peterson. And these are all named after rivers in the Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland area: Susquehanna, Allegheny, Wabash, Potomac, Shenandoah, Rappahannock, and Tallahatchie, which was just released a couple of years ago. That is a photo of one of his improved selections. This is Susquehanna, and you can see that the fruit it has a very high ratio of pulp to seeds. There's very few seeds here. The seeds are small, and this fruit is very outstanding, very large size. That one right there probably weighs 3/4 of a pound. We'll look at some other pawpaw photos to compare here in a minute. Kentucky State University also became interested in developing pawpaws, and that's located in Frankfort, Kentucky. This was initiated in the late 1990s and is currently the only full-time pawpaw research program in the world. They began working with Neil and utilized his cultivars as the basis of their breeding program. Also, a superior cultivar from Kansas called Sunflower was also utilized. As of 2021, 3 exceptional cultivars of pawpaws have been named and released by KSU, and that's KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, and KSU Chappelle. These are all patented and trademarked, and we are actually licensed to propagate and sell these varieties in our nursery. These selections, as well as some of the late Jerry Leymans of Indiana, represent the cutting edge of modern pawpaw breeding and selection. Jerry Lehman actually had about 40-some acres of American persimmons and pawpaws in Terre Haute, Indiana. He passed away a couple of years ago from an accident working on his trees. And some of his varieties are some of the best out there and have won many awards. And at our nursery in Kentucky, we're also collecting, identifying, and selecting for better pawpaw genetics ourselves. So why is this selection work important? Fruit quality varies greatly amongst wild trees, okay? This bottom photo is a fairly typical wild pawpaw, and above is an improved selected variety. So you can see there's a big difference between the amount of pulp to seed. You can see this little wild one is just chock full of seeds, doesn't look especially appealing, probably doesn't really taste that great either. And the one above it is luscious and sweet and full of delicious pulp. Poor quality fruit's very seedy with low pulp to seed ratio. Flavor can sometimes be unpleasant, but not necessarily. Sometimes the wild fruits taste great, but sometimes they're not so great. Production can be sparse as well. Thus, the need for improvement and selection is vital for this crop. Superior pawpaw selections produce large fruit of high quality and large yields. 1 bushel, about 30 to 35 pounds per tree, is considered a good yield right now. That's a photo of one of Neil Peterson's varieties there. I think that might be Wabash. Pawpaws are currently being grown and developed all over the world. Japan, Korea, Ukraine, all over Europe, Italy, Germany, etc., Canada, and throughout the entire USA. And apparently they've been grown in Japan for decades. Their popularity continues to increase and expand. Currently, they're used to produce ice cream, sauces, frozen pulp, beer and wine, and baked goods. Actually, a lot of local beer producers and breweries and things are very interested in experimenting with pawpaw, and it makes outstandingly good ice cream. There's a rapidly growing market for nursery trees as well. Their hardy nature facilitates the organic production of pawpaw. This is a food forest I planted about 20 years ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and the pawpaws there are thriving with virtually no care. Pawpaws are disease resistant and not prone to many serious issues. Within their native range, insects and diseases can become minor to moderate problems, but generally they're not plagued by challenges like organic apples, peaches, etc. For any of you that have attempted to grow organic fruit, especially tree fruits, you know that apples and stone fruits are often just plagued with all sorts of problems. Pawpaws have their share of challenges, but they're generally a lot less. And this is making them a very attractive option for organic farmers all over the country and various places around the world. So pawpaw pests are too numerous to go into detail here, but are described in much detail in the book. Those are Asimina webworms there, making a little tent and feasting on foliage. However, one is worth mentioning here, and that is the zebra swallowtail butterfly, or ZSB. This is the larval form in various stages of maturity. You can see they start out quite tiny and end up becoming quite large. That one on the top is probably pushing an inch long. The adult form is very large and beautiful. The fascinating aspect of zebra swallowtail butterflies is that they have a symbiotic relationship with pawpaws, and it is the only plant they lay their eggs on, and is the only food the larval form can consume. Therefore, they are 100% reliant on pawpaws for their survival. Planted pawpaw groves often become sanctuaries for these lovely insects. The presence of the butterflies means pawpaw trees are around somewhere. And that is a photo from the book of a zebra swallowtail butterfly. I'm seeing these fluttering around currently on our property. And so if you plant pawpaw trees, typically sooner or later, these little guys will often show up. Maybe not so much if you're in the middle of a huge urban area where they don't really exist anymore or have never existed. But if you live within their range, and especially near any rural location, these will often show up. And there's a yellow form as well. And they're quite beautiful and also somewhat threatened due to deforestation. So planting pawpaw trees can help not only the pawpaw, which is somewhat threatened in many areas, but also the insects that are reliant on pawpaw, which includes the ZSB. So you can plant your own butterfly sanctuary and get delicious fruit at the same time. And the Ohio Pawpaw Festival is very popular and was recently awarded the title the best festival in Ohio. So if any of you all haven't heard of this, this is a very popular festival. It happens in Chillicothe, Ohio, typically in September in the height of pawpaw season. And it's a very popular event. There's all sorts of musicians and artists that come. They do, there's a lot of pawpaw inspired art. There's fruit tastings. There's the best fruit contest, the biggest fruit contest. There's lots of value added goods people bring for showing off the possibilities of pawpaw. There's people with trees and plants for sale. There's people dressed up like pawpaws. There's all kinds of crazy fun going on. And it's been going on now for over 20 years. I'm not sure what the status is with it this year, but it will probably be going on. So you can check that out online if you're interested. And so in conclusion, pawpaws are a valuable addition to the temperate fruit world, and they are nutritious, relatively easy to grow, and totally delicious. They also have many multifaceted value-added goods possibilities. Hardy and adaptable, they are a great addition to the small farm and backyard orchard in many diverse locations. So speaking of locations, I get emails all the time of people saying, I want to grow pawpaws in Western Washington, or I want to grow pawpaws in Arizona, or I want to grow pawpaws in Florida, or I want to grow pawpaws in Maine. And so we have to understand that the tree does have some limitations, and it needs a certain set of parameters within which to grow. So for instance, we said earlier, it does not grow in the tropics. It will not grow in a tropical location, and it probably won't grow in a subtropical location either. It has to have a cold period below 32 degrees for at least a few months to go dormant. It does very well in deep south locations where there is winter cold, such as the Gulf area of the USA, around southern Mississippi to northern Florida, parts of Louisiana. It does quite well. It also will grow all the way up north to the very southern tips of Ontario, upstate New York. And apparently there are people successfully growing them in Vermont and possibly in parts of Maine as well. However, in locations that are too far north, such as Vermont and Maine, they're going to be very challenging places to try to grow pawpaws. They're going to suffer from winter damage. Some varieties may not ripen fruit properly before freezing weather comes. Any sort of frost or anything is going to destroy the fruit, especially if it's not ripe yet. And so it won't grow everywhere. It also doesn't like very highly intensely windy areas, and it also doesn't like arid locations. So even in California, where it's not exactly arid, such as the middle and northern parts of California, it still doesn't really like that climate that much, and also is known to suffer from really bad snail and slug issues in California, and also up in Oregon and Washington. But it will grow there. However, in desert locations, it's going to require some partial shade. It's going to require a cold period, and it's going to require a lot of irrigation. So some growers will put shade cloth structures over the trees to give them some shade. I know of one grower in Southern California who's rigged up a whole irrigation system and shade cloth and everything to grow pawpaws. Personally, I'd probably just grow avocados and cherimoyas and call it good. But you know, there are people that are very enthusiastic about this. So you just have to remember the ideal environment for it is as close to the upper South and mid-Atlantic areas as possible, where you've got some winter cold, but it doesn't get too extreme. You've got humidity, and you've got lots of moisture in the soil. And if you have all those things, then pawpaws can do pretty well. Also worth mentioning is that you have to have more than one pawpaw tree in order to cross-pollinate. So they are not self-pollinating. I get a lot of questions sometimes of people saying, oh, I heard this variety was self-pollinating, or I have one tree that gets some fruit on it and there's no other fruit trees, there's no other pawpaw trees around. So is this tree self-pollinating? They can sometimes be very slightly self-pollinating, where you might get a few fruits from one lone tree. But as far as one that's fully self-pollinating, that bears full crops with no other pollination from another tree, that's not really known at this time, and that hasn't been identified. However, there are some varieties such as sunflower, which will get a few fruits by themselves sometimes, some seasons. I've also seen the same variety sunflower get no fruit when there's not any pollination happening. So do keep that in mind. You have to have more than one, and any two pawpaws will cross-pollinate as long as they are different varieties. So if they're a name variety, they have the exact same genetics. So for instance, a sunflower is genetically identical to every other sunflower pawpaw, or a KSU Atwood pawpaw is genetically identical to every other KSU Atwood pawpaw. But a KSU Atwood pawpaw and a sunflower pawpaw will cross-pollinate, or a KSU Atwood pawpaw and a seedling pawpaw will cross-pollinate, or two seedlings, all seedlings are genetically different, they will cross-pollinate. So just want to clarify that. And I'm happy to tell you about some more resources here. So if you're interested in learning more about pawpaws, there's some nice resources. Growingfruit.org is a grower forum that I'm a part of, and it's got hundreds of pages devoted to pawpaws, so many that you'll just be tired of reading about it. Pawpaw Fanatics is a Facebook page for pawpaw fans, and our nursery, Peaceful Heritage.com, is our website and has many pages of pawpaw information. We've got a full pawpaw FAQ. We've got dozens of variety descriptions on there, and the book is for sale there. And also we do sell seeds and scion wood, and we're going to be increasing both of those as time goes on. And so those are available for those that maybe can't get trees shipped to their area, or want to try growing their own from seed or grafting. And so once again, this is the book, The Complete Growing and Marketing Guide, and I'm the author, and I thank you very much for your time. And I'm very happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you so much, Blake. That was awesome.
Thank you.
We have a ton of questions coming in.
All right.
So lots of people interested in pawpaws and learning more. So I'll just start, I have them open here, and I'll start asking some questions. So these questions are coming to us from both our Zoom audience and our Facebook audience. And we apologize to our Facebook viewers for the late start. if you did register through Eventbrite, we will send you the full recording. I think there was a couple minutes missed at the beginning. So this is a question from Martin asking about pawpaws being grown from seed. Can they be grown from seed? And if so, do you sell such seeds?
Well, if they couldn't be grown from seed, I think they'd be extinct. But yeah, they maybe your question's more of can good pawpaws be grown from seed? And so yes, absolutely. You just have to have good seed. So the seed has to have good genetics. If you get seeds out of the pawpaws that I showed you in the picture that are the little wild ones with a million seeds, you're going to get a small fruit with a million seeds. If you plant one that comes out of a big, luscious pawpaw with small seeds and great quality, you're very likely to get one that is similar to that. They don't come out exactly the same, like a tomato or something like that, but they also don't come out completely random, such as an apple tree. So the genetics of the pawpaw doesn't fall that far from the pawpaw tree, so to speak. So they're pretty similar, and we do sell those improved genetics seeds, and that's our Ultra Select line, and that is available on our website, peacefulheritage.com. We don't currently have any seed, but we will have seed available this upcoming winter when after the pawpaw season.
Okay, great, thank you. And another question is, to get high yields, do you have to hand pollinate?
No, you don't have to. You don't have to hand pollinate. Hand pollination is very effective at increasing yield and guaranteeing yield, especially if trees are planted too far apart, or if you only have one pawpaw tree that's in flower and none others around. You can collect flowers that are at the pollen shed stage from other trees that are genetically different and bring those and hand pollinate them. Hand pollination is very effective if done correctly, and that's detailed in the book. However, it can increase yields to the point of over yielding to where the tree will yield too much fruit and can actually break the branches from the weight of the fruit. So hand pollination has to be careful, and KSU does recommend thinning out fruits if there's too many on there. So you just want to be careful of that. But hand pollination is very effective, and it's not very difficult to do. It only takes maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to hand pollinate a whole tree.
Okay, great. And Ron Martin's asking how long it takes before a pawpaw tree will produce fruit.
Okay. It takes a little while from seed, and it depends also on the quality of the site and the quality of the care that they're given. So if they're given a poor site and a poor quality specimen, it could take 8 or 10 years before they get fruit. If they're given good care and a good site and you've got a good specimen going in the ground, it can be as fast as 3 or 4 years. From seed, we found it takes at least about 5 years from seed. Possibly it could happen at 4, but more like 5 to 6 from seed. So if you were to plant a seed in 2021, you're looking at 2027 or something before it comes out. That sounds like a long time away, but it's really not. And grafted trees do produce a lot faster, usually about 2 to 3 years, depending on the size of the tree. If you're starting with, say, like a 1 or 2 foot tall grafted tree, you're looking at probably about 3 to 4 years before you get any fruit production. And just because the tree's flowering doesn't mean you should let it fruit. I've seen trees that we just grafted in the nursery this season and they're already blooming. You absolutely can't let that set fruit until they're at least about 4 or 5 feet tall, because it puts too much strain on the tree to try to fruit when it's a foot tall or 2 feet tall. It's very stressful on the tree and can permanently stunt them. Similar to with like apples and pears, you don't want them flowering and fruiting when they're a foot or 2 tall either. So you have to be patient.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like you're in it for the long game with most fruit trees, but just being patient and waiting for your fruit to come. So Don is asking about, he says, living at higher latitudes, for example, Ottawa, Southern Ontario, There's been some doubts that the improved varieties by KSU or other breeders in the US would not be tolerant to Canadian winters down to -20 Celsius. Can you address the temperature concerns? That would be like -4 Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm. So they do vary in their tolerance to cold depending on where they originate from. So if you've got a pawpaw variety, like let's say there's a variety called mango, it's actually one of my least favorite varieties, although the name makes it sound like it's going to be something great. But the variety mango comes from southern Georgia, so I wouldn't recommend planting that up in upstate New York, for instance. Will it succeed? Maybe. But you want to basically try to go for varieties that originate from areas similar to where you're planting them. So especially if you're in a marginal area like a deep south location or a further north location. So for instance, there are some varieties that can do well in northern areas, such as Pennsylvania Golden. NC1 comes from Ontario, and it also happens to be one of the best varieties available. And there's also another one called Halvin that was discovered in Iowa, which is a very marginal location for pawpaws, fairly far north. And so, for instance, those are three varieties that are adapted to growing in more northern, colder regions because that's where those varieties actually originated from. So I would focus on any varieties that come out of those areas, and also planting seeds from said varieties, which will produce offspring, which are going to have a higher chance of succeeding in your area.
Okay, great. And so another question sort of related to varieties, Hansel asks, said that you mentioned that you're developing new varieties at your nursery, and asking if you could speak a little bit about how you're going about doing that.
Yeah, so right now we are planting out selected seedlings. The oldest seedlings we have right now were planted in 2015, and so they're 6 years old. They're starting to bloom. Unfortunately, last year and this year we've had some very, very rough spring freezes that have done a lot of damage to some of our trees and the flowers on those trees. And so we are trialing them still. They are growing well, and some of them are blooming this year. We might see a little bit of fruit from them. They're mostly crosses of various cultivars, specifically some of the Peterson varieties and also sunflower. And it's interesting because even at this early stage, we can see a lot of variation between the forms and the growth rates of some of them. Some of them are 6 years old and they're still 4 feet tall. Some are 6 years old and they're pushing 8 feet tall. So it's interesting. And the ones that grow the best and get the best fruit, which hopefully this year, next year, we can start to get a little fruit production to start trying that. Once we have that evaluated, we're going to try to start releasing some of these in the nursery trade within the next couple of years.
Excellent. So do you keep your fruiting trees pruned to facilitate harvesting?
That's a really good question, and that's all covered in the book in a lot of detail. And we do. I like to keep them pruned quite small. Unpruned pawpaw trees shoot for the sky and get about 20 feet tall. In shady locations, they can get even taller, 30 feet, maybe taller.
Wow.
But in a full sun location, which is always the best place to put a pawpaw, full sun, they get about 20 feet tall. And they can get quite wide and bushy too, up to about 15 or 20 feet wide. So we like to keep them pruned quite a bit smaller. KSU recommends around 8 to 10 feet. That sounds about right to us. So I like to keep them about 8 feet tall. And I'm also growing them, not to grow them into huge specimens, but to be mother trees for our nursery. So a lot of twig production. And so I do prune them a lot to facilitate getting lots of twigs, which we need for grafting. So a lot of people find that pruning them to 8 to 10 feet is helps keep them smaller and makes the harvesting and maintenance of the trees a lot easier.
Okay, great. And we do have a few questions around sort of transplanting and deep roots. So somebody mentions that they researched that pawpaws do have a deep root system, but can you get away with planting them temporarily in like a 2-gallon pots? Would that be deep enough?
Sure. So pawpaws are taprooted, and actually when the seed sprouts, the taproot shoots out first and grows for a number of weeks, up to a month or even 5 or 6 weeks before the top growth even shows. So in my mind, that's an adaptation to the riparian environment where they originated, which is prone to flooding. So the seeds will quickly sprout out of taproot, get really nicely rooted in there so they don't wash away in heavy rains or flood and get killed. And so they root very rapidly, and then they put on their top growth. And so you can grow them in containers temporarily, of course, in the nursery. That's what we do. We start them out in special containers and then transplant them to a larger container about, I think it's 10 or 11 inches deep. And so we get sometimes people getting very concerned, almost frantic about pawpaws taproots, that oh my gosh, these are taprooted, and how can you ever plant them out once the taproot's been disturbed, so on and so forth. And the taproot, in my mind, is an adaptation for survival. And it's not necessary for the trees to grow and thrive to never have their taproot disturbed. Otherwise, anyone that ever planted out a tree that wasn't just planted from a seed stuck in the ground in the spot where it's going to be would be a failure. But you go to places like KSU or every pawpaw orchard around, and they've got big, beautiful trees full of fruit, and the taproots have all been disturbed on them through transplanting and containerizing and everything. So it's really not that big of a deal. I have also noticed that they do somewhat regenerate their taproot. Just because the taproot's cut or disturbed in some way doesn't mean it's gone forever. They continue to send another big root down. So they can be grown in containers temporarily, but not long term. I would recommend keeping them in a smaller size container, not more than a couple years, and not trying to grow them in some big, huge container on and on and on. It's just going to be kind of disappointing in the long run. So basically, you just want to keep them in containers for no more than a couple years, and then get them in the ground as soon as you can.
Okay, great. And then, so we have Anthony asking, that he says that he's had 2 pawpaws in his row house backyard in Maryland for about 3 years, and they're about 10 feet tall, but as of yet, no flowers. Are they too young? He doesn't know the species because he got them from a fruit tree giveaway.
Okay. One more thing I want to say about transplanting pawpaws. We do cover this in the book as well. It's very important to only transplant pawpaws when they are budding out or have leaves forming, or they can have leaves. You don't want to plant them in the fall or in the winter time when they're going dormant or they are dormant, because pawpaws, unlike apples and pears, don't grow roots during the winter time. So if you plant them in the fall or in the winter, the mortality rate is going to be very, very high. And so you want to plant them when they're budding out in the spring. I also recommend planting them out after chance of frost in your area, because they can start leafing out when it warms up. And if you're in an area like Kentucky where there's a lot of late freezes and frost, it can zap them. And they will usually recover, but it's not a great way to get off to a good start. So make sure you only transplant them in the spring or early summer. And back to his question. So these, you don't know the pedigree of these trees because they're from a free giveaway. So they could be from cultivated fruit. They could be from wild fruit. Sometimes it takes them a long time to flower. Assuming there's no late frost burning off the blooms, I would just say wait and maybe get them a high phosphorus fertilizer to stimulate some flower production, such as rock phosphate, or there's a lot of organic fertilizers on the market that have phosphorus. You can look into that. But you may want to get them some phosphorus that'll stimulate fruit production. You might also want to try trimming them back and that can stimulate some flower production too, just taking them out of vegetative mode and trying to trigger them into flower mode. It's probably too late to do that this year, but I would go ahead and fertilize them, and maybe this late winter give them some prune back. And what you're going to look for is initiation of flower buds, which happens in the autumn and winter. Actually, you'll see these little kind of BB sized brown fuzzy balls right above the leaf scars from last year. You'll see these little brown furry little BB sized little balls, and those are the flower buds that will start elongating around March or April, depending on your location.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then we have a question about what other plants work well in symbiotic relationship with pawpaws, so, or in a guild?
Yeah, recently been asked that question. So I find there's not a lot that doesn't seem to do well as far as low growing things. The wild native violets do well. Ground ivy does great. I know these are common names. I apologize, I don't know the Latin for a lot of these. Comfrey does fine. A lot of herbs and things like lemon balm or mint, they do fine. Wildflowers of various kinds. There's not a lot that I find that doesn't do well. Berry vines like black raspberries, it can tolerate a little bit more shade. Obviously, the pawpaw makes a pretty dense shade underneath it, so it's got to be something that can tolerate shade. And you also don't want to plant something that's going to compete with the pawpaws, such as other fruit trees or wild trees too close to them, or vines that might start wrapping up the tree and competing.
Okay, great. That's great information. Thank you. And then a question from Facebook from Ruth Ann. I may pronounce the name of the park incorrectly, but she says a large grove in Elpicos State Park only produced a few last year. Why would an entire grove not produce one year?
Yeah, this is a very common question. Like I mentioned earlier, I can go back up here to the picture if you all can still see the screen share there. This is probably looks kind of something like what she's talking about here. And like I said, you look out and you say, oh, there's so many pawpaw trees here. There's 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200. But actually, this could all just be one tree that has suckered underground and formed a thicket. So pawpaws are thicket producing plants similar to wild plums, or you could also say bananas, where it looks like there's dozens of specimens, but really it could just be one or maybe two, or maybe just a handful that have suckered out and formed dozens of stems that appear to be separate trees. But if you were to dig them up, you'd see they're all connected by the root system. They're just one. So like we mentioned, pawpaws, they're not self-pollinating. So if you have a thicket, even if it looks like there's 100 trees, if it's really just one or maybe two, there's probably not a lot of cross-pollination going on. There may not be a lot of pollinators. I find in wild forested areas like this, there's hardly any fruit. Enough for some possums to eat maybe, but not to be harvesting from. Like this thicket I would go to here, I'd be lucky if I could find, a small bucket or two of pawpaws in a season, and I was content with that. But they don't produce a lot in the wild, often because of shade and lack of pollination being the two most important factors. So so depending on the laws of the park and or a similar situation, you could bring in different genetics and plant them around. You could bring in some saplings and plant them around, or if it's your own property, you could do that and bring in some different genetics. I've actually gone in and top worked wild trees to name cultivars as well, using the wild trees as rootstock. So it's mostly lack of pollination and genetic variation there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, we have time, I think, for a couple more questions before we wrap it up and announce our winners for the day. And so somebody's asking about, actually, if you hand pick the fruit or if you wait for it to fall to the ground and pick it up off the ground.
Sure. So the fruit has to be soft, ripe, meaning that when you squeeze the fruit very gently, it should leave a slight indentation from your thumb or your finger. So that's a good sign that it's ripe. It should also have a nice fragrance to it. So similar to a peach, that texture of a peach where you press into the peach and it kind of gently gives a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That means the pawpaw is most likely ready. In that case, you can pick it and or snip it, including the stem is the best way to do it, because when you pick them, it usually rips the stem off the fruit, and that creates an opening in the flesh that can be a vector site for bacteria and yeast and things to start spoiling the fruit, similar to like an avocado. And so it's best to let the fruit drop. That's when it's dead ripe, and in that case, it usually only lasts a few days before it starts to spoil. However, if you're careful and you squeeze them and you find ones that are a little bit soft and have a little bit of give, you can pick those, and you could try eating it. And if it's not quite ripe, you could just let them sit at room temperature for a couple days till they get really nice and soft. Some people like them at the green state. Some people like them when they've got some brown spots forming, similar to a banana. Few people like them when they turn dark brown, like an overripe banana, but some people do, and the flavor profile changes. But that being said, if you do pick them rock hard off the tree, or you shake a tree and a bunch of hard ones fall off, the likelihood of those ripening is very small, and they usually just are a waste. So you want to be careful. Just let the tree drop its fruit, or go around and squeeze them all if you can't wait, and see if you can find some that have a little bit of give to them.
Awesome, thank you. And one question that comes from the West Coast here, where we are in British Columbia, and particularly the Gulf Islands, asking how much winter wet conditions can they withstand, because we do get a lot of rain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, Rob West at New Society informed me that pawpaws are becoming kind of a thing in British Columbia. And so people must be having success with it. The winter moisture is no problem. I mean, our winters are very, very wet here in Kentucky. Probably similar temperatures to British Columbia. Probably a little colder even. You do in the West Coast, you do have to watch out for slugs and snails, which are a problem when the trees are leafed out. They can really go nuts on them in the West Coast for some reason. And there's also something I talk about in the book called blue stem disease, or BSD, and that can be a problem on the West Coast as well. So what I would do is I would just try to find if there's any local people growing them, and just consult with them and say, what varieties are you having success with? Maybe try to graft some from them, get some scion wood, get some seeds from them, get the cultivar names. If no one's growing them at all, then just consider it very experimental. And a lot of places they're going to be very experimental, and all I can say is good luck, and don't be too attached if you live in some really marginal area, because it just might not work out.
Now, the fact that we don't get really cold winters, is that an issue as well? That we don't get below zero often?
You're temperate enough that it's probably okay. I mean, if it goes below 0 Celsius, at least sometimes you should be fine.
Okay.
But you're probably going to want to be selective about the varieties. So I would check with some local nurseries and see if there's any local growers. You can go on the growingfruit.org forum and ask some questions about that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I apologize for our early technical issues. It seems just like when we think we've got it down, something.
Oh, that was my fault. There's nothing like being about to give a live presentation, accidentally unplugging your computer. So,
oh, yeah. Well, my internet went out as well, so I think we got all of the things that could happen happened, but we came through it, and so we appreciate the patience of our viewers. And like I said, we will send you the full recording. And so don't forget, you can receive a 25% discount off of Pawpaws, the complete growing and marketing guide, at newsociety.com with the code PAWPAW25. So this is just off press, so you'll be one of the first groups of people to get the book. And I want to thank Brittany in the background, who's been handling everybody's questions and answering different, solving different issues as we go. So thank you, Brittany. Our winning question, so this is the person who is going to win a copy of Pawpaws, is Hansel de Sousa. So Brittany will be in touch with you to get your mailing address. So congratulations and thank you for the great questions. And our winner for the Harrowsmith magazine is Dawn Kerr. So again, we'll get in touch with you for your contact information. Just a reminder that our next event and our last one of the season is May 27th, and it's about growing conifers. So evergreen your landscape with the beauty and benefits of conifers. You can sign up on our Eventbrite with that one. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Blake. We really appreciate your time, and it's such great information. And it's so nice to, as COVID has been so weird, not actually getting to meet you in person. And so this is kind of how we get to do it these days, but it's been nice working with you over the past few months, and nice to sort of get to interact in somewhat of a personal way.
Absolutely.
So, thanks everybody, and hopefully we'll see you for growing conifers on May 27th. And don't forget to pick up your copy of Pawpaws.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.